Democratic Congressman Marc Veasey of Fort Worth, the 33rd Congressional District here in North Texas. You watched the Ukrainian President Zelensky's speech before Congress today. What were your thoughts?
I'm glad that President Zelenskyy is optimistic and that he is in good spirits, because I think it's important for the Ukrainian people to see that their leader is resolute and that he is committed to making sure that they maintain their status as an independent country and that they push back against Russian aggression. And so I thought that was really good. And I'm glad that he went to the world to plead his case. I think that it's going to be something that he's going to have to do from now until Putin decides that this is no longer a value to Russia for them to try and occupy and try and put in their own puppet government in Ukraine. I think it's an appeal that he's going to have to make for quite some time.
As you know, the Ukrainian president called for a no-fly zone over his country. President Biden has already said that's not going to happen. Where are you on this issue?
Yeah, and I think that it's really important for people to know that when they hear that term, that there's really no such thing as a no-fly zone in and of itself. A no-fly zone applied in this situation is a declaration of war against Russia. So basically, you're looking at the beginning of World War III. And so if you hear a Republican senator or anyone in the House, for that matter, say that they support a no-fly zone, I do think that the MiGs will be very useful to Ukraine. But again, I think that what people really need to fully understand and consider is that, A, you wouldn't want the United States acting unilaterally and that type of decision. You would want all of our NATO partners to be on board with that sort of call. Would the Germans, be okay with those planes being sent to a base in Germany that's run by U.S. personnel over to the Ukraine? Probably not. The Poles themselves didn't want the transfer to happen directly from Poland to the Ukraine. They wanted it to come from them and then be sent to an American air base in Europe and then sent over to Ukraine. And so even they didn't want to directly do it. And I'll never forget back in 2013 when I took a trip to Germany with Charlie Dent. It was a bipartisan trip that the two of us took, and Dent was still in Congress at the time. And the officials that we met with from Germany on a couple of our stops told us that in America, we have a completely different perspective on how to deal with Russia. And they said it was in their best interest to try to maintain as good of a relationship with Russia as possible, because we didn't have the ocean and the seas to separate our country from their borders. And he said, and the people went on to tell us that psychologically that makes a big difference, that they wanted Russia to be a good neighbor and that they wanted to have good relationships with them. And so how they see we should proceed on all of these things is going to be a lot different than how the average American processes what needs to be done next in order to stop Putin and, again, his unlawful move.
Senator Cornyn said today, he basically criticized the Biden administration for being too timid and call for them to be less so. And my question is, what's your reaction to that? But what do you say to those who say Russia's President Putin is basically bullying, the United States, our allies, and the rest of the world over this?
I would say that that's crazy. I would say that Putin's not bullying anyone. Putin is having a hard time. He thought that he was going to go into the Ukraine and have a compliant government and a puppet government in place in a matter of days. And that's not happening. He's having a hard time even establishing air dominance over the Ukraine. And so, I would say that Putin's not bullying anyone. Anybody can assess this situation and see that that's not happening. The other thing that I would say is, again, as far as these escalations are concerned, do you really want to get into a situation where all of a sudden America is put up, first and foremost to lead this effort to stop Russia in what could be, again, the beginning of World War III. We have to be very delicate about how each and every move that we make, what's going to transpire after that move is made. We don't need to be afraid of Putin. We don't need to worry in regards to how he may respond in kind. But we do have to be concerned that if this thing escalates and he feels he has nowhere else to go, that perhaps the Chinese eventually get in, that the Iranians decide that they want to get in. And then again, you have the beginning of something that is spiraling out of control, and something that we haven't seen the likes of since World War II. And so again, it's one thing to pound your chest from the outside, but when you're sitting in that Oval Office where the president sits and he has to make all of these decisions, it's much easier said than done. Again, doing that from the outside. And I think that most Americans, based on what's happened in Afghanistan, what's happened in Iraq, pretty much have the view that going into these situations that are going to be long and drawn out is not something that is in America's best interest right now. I think that what President Biden is doing by hitting Putin in the wallet, that's the most powerful thing and the most effective thing that he can do right now without putting American servicemen and women in harm's way.
What more could and should the United States do to help Ukraine?
Obviously, we need to make sure that the aid is ongoing. We need to make sure that humanitarian relief is as effective and that is as robust as possible, and that people that all of a sudden had access to food a few weeks ago, won't have that food soon. Most reports that I'm hearing saying that Ukraine could have a very serious food shortage here in the next couple of weeks. We want to make sure that they have just the basic substance that they need in order to be able to endure this with their families. And again, we need to look for different ways that we can hit Putin in the pocketbook. And we also need to try to convince the rest of the world. Putin can't see this as NATO versus Putin. He has to see this as the world versus Putin. And obviously, you're going to have some players like Cuba and like China and Iran that just aren't going to go along with trying to push back on Putin. But if the rest of the world says, you know what, enough is enough, and it's not just a US-Europe thing, then I guarantee you that Putin will pay attention to that right now, because what he's hoping for is that it's really just Putin versus NATO. But once it expands beyond that, and he realizes that there's not a lot of different options for him, and there's not a lot of empathy for him amongst world leaders, then you start to look for, then he will start to look for different off ramps where he can get out of this thing and try to save as much face as possible.
And my last question to you is, do you believe U.S. energy policy as it exists now is seen as national security, or does it need to become so?
No, I actually absolutely think that U.S. energy policy as it's seen right now is definitely very well rooted in national security. We obviously have a large supply of oil here that we keep on reserve for emergencies. We are the world's leading producers of oil. We're producing a lot of natural gas here. I'm sure you're going to see more and more exporting of LNG to Europe, depending on how long this situation lasts with Russia. And so absolutely, I believe that our policy is very well rooted when it comes to energy security, and rightfully so, it should be.
Congressman Marc Veasey of Fort Worth, the 33rd Congressional District, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Jack.